Hey kids, so this week we're going to start doing some video instruction. Um, Essentially, what I'm going to be doing is just taking the slide presentations that I already had that we would have normally been doing in class, and rather than giving you a copy of the notes like we do in class, I've just kind of converted everything over into a separate Google Doc where you'll have some questions that pertain specifically to the content. Um, on the slides presentations, but also some of the information that I'll be saying. So it's probably worth your while to at least watch the video to get the content and then fill out the answers. If at some point you simply cannot find the answer based on what's in here, don't worry, you can look it up in your textbook or find it on the web or something like that, whatever works best for you. So there will probably be a couple of these that'll be posted. We're starting, it's not really a new unit, I guess. It's a new section to this unit called How Markets Work. And in this section, we're going to be talking a little bit about how companies compete with each other, how they form their legal existence, and what the kind of benefits and drawbacks to that might be. And then what happens when companies kind of decide that they want to join together with another company. All right. So we're going to get started here on how markets work. And the first thing I want to talk about is different forms of entrepreneurship. So back in our first unit, we talked about the factors of production, and we said one of those factors is an entrepreneur. It's an economic risk taker, somebody who's going to open up a business, generally for profit. And in this slide, what we're going to talk about is the difference between external and internal entrepreneurs. In a nutshell, an external entrepreneur is going to be somebody who simply opens up a business because they see an opportunity. It's an economic opportunity. It's maybe an opportunity that isn't being filled by anyone else. So they're going to go out and they're going to open up a business because they see a demand for that business. An internal entrepreneur, though, is going to be somebody who's going to be motivated more by an interest that they have, maybe a hobby, maybe something that they participate in. So, you know, if you are somebody who's into cycling, you open up a bike shop. If you're somebody who's into sewing, maybe you open up a fabric shop and a sewing shop, that kind of a thing. So it's the real major difference here is what motivates the entrepreneur to get into business. One is external, from outside, and it's simply about going out and starting up a business that you might be interested in, but it's not based upon a personal interest of your own. And then an internal entrepreneur, where it is based on that personal interest of your own. It's something you have maybe an expertise in, or an interest in, or a knowledge in. And you know that other people are out there who want to have access to whatever it is that you're offering. So it's also a way for you to maybe commune with people in your local community and work with them to open up something, or just make resources available to people because maybe they're hard to come by. All right, so let's talk a little bit about competition and market structures. So first of all, when we're talking about a market structure, what we're talking about is the ways in which businesses compete against each other similarly. These are the determinants of the market structure. I'm just going to go through this to explain a couple of them. Freedom of entry and exit is about how easy it is for new businesses to enter into the market. In some cases, it's real easy. You can just go out and start up a business. But in other cases, it's going to be difficult for you to open up a business that could actually compete with the existing businesses that are out there. When we talk about nature of product, we're talking about whether or not the products that are being sold or the services that are being provided, whether or not those things are identical, meaning literally identical, like apples at one store are the same as apples at another store. Or if we're talking about things that are differentiated. So when we're talking about differentiated, what we mean is one business might be selling apples, the other one might be selling oranges, but they're still competing with each other in the fruit market. Control over price, that's more about your relationship with your competitors. If you change your price, it may be disadvantage. It might be a disadvantage for you. Whereas in other cases, you have to change your price because your competitors changed their price ahead of time. And then when we talk about barriers to entry, what we're talking about is how difficult is it? realistically, for somebody to compete with, like a large corporation such as AT&T, could you go out and start up a new mobile phone business and actually compete? Probably not, because they're so large. Or Verizon, they're so large, and it would make it pretty much impossible for you to enter into that market as a new competitor. All right. So let's talk a little bit here about each one of these forms of competition. So the first one is called perfect competition. Sometimes you're going to hear this one referred to as pure competition as well. With perfect competition, what we're talking about is everybody selling exactly the same thing, essentially. All right. So in this case, everything is what we call a homogeneous product. That's when everything that's being sold is identical or close to identical. And therefore, it's what we call substitutable, meaning if you can't find the product at one store, you can go to another store and find exactly what it is you're looking for. I think the best example for this is a farmer's market, as I have here on the slide. If you've ever been to a farmer's market, whether it's here in Glens Falls or somewhere else, and you want to go in, let's say in the fall, and you're looking for apples, you're probably going to find 4 or 5 different vendors who are selling apples. The McIntosh apples at one place are exactly the same as the McIntosh apples someplace else. So they are perfectly substitutable. If one vendor doesn't have enough, you can go someplace else and get the product that you're looking for. So the big thing here about perfect competition is these people are competing against each other, but it's not based on product differentiation. They're competing with the same stuff. They're competing with the same product. Therefore, they need to come up with new or different ways to provide that product or attract customers to them that's not based on the product itself. So that might be through customer service. Maybe they're just super friendly. They remember your name every time you're there. Maybe it's in their display, whatever it might be. They're good at drawing people in based upon who they are, not on what they're selling. We also see this in financial markets like stock markets. The stocks themselves, the companies themselves are different, but the product, buying a share of stock, is exactly the same from one company to another. Prices will vary, obviously, based upon the success of that company, but it is essentially a perfect competition because you do also have a lot of information, and that's the other key component here is that you have information. If you go to the farmer's market, you have the farmer. You can ask him. You can ask him any questions about the products it is that he's selling, or at least farm hands who would have information for you. So if you're looking for organic foods, you can find out, are they organic? Do they use pesticides? Do they use fertilizers? What types of fertilizers? Those kinds of things. And the same with financial markets. When we talk about like stocks, those companies are mandated by the federal government to provide information about their companies. The next form of business structure here is a monopolistic competition. And so this one gets confusing sometimes for people who hear the word monopolistic, because we're not talking about a company that has a monopoly. What we're talking about is that they have a monopoly on something that they provide, meaning they're the only one who's doing it. So these are products that are usually highly differentiated, but are still substitutable because as you can see, I use the example here of local downtown restaurants. They all offer different food. They all have something different and unique to them, but they're substitutable in the sense that if you go to Davidson Brothers and there's a 30-minute wait for a table, you can go across the street to Gourmet Cafe and you can still get a meal. It's a different meal. And each one of these companies offers something very unique to them that's different and not like any of the other restaurants downtown. So Davidson Brothers is a brew pub. They offer craft beers that they make themselves. Gourmet Cafe, if you've ever been, has an awesome all-you-can-eat pasta night where you get to design your own pasta and you can keep going up unlimited number of times. Rock Hill's no longer there. The company that took over, Exchange, they're essentially selling the same product, but they have, all baked goods that are made right at Rock Hill. And then Raoul's has a kind of a monopoly on the downtown Mexican food market. There's El Rancho, which is across the bridge, and there's a couple of other Mexican places in the area. But as far as directly downtown, Raoul's has a monopoly on that type of a setup. Other examples I provided here, toothbrushes. They're all basically the same, but they all have their own different designs. And so that makes them a little bit monopolistic, whether it's a curved handle or the way the bristles are shaped, whatever it might be. That's where they have that little bit of a monopoly. The next market structure is an oligopoly. And when we talk about an oligopoly, what we're talking about is just a few very large companies that dominate the market. And so in the picture I have here, you can see I kind of highlighted the mobile industry, the mobile technology industry. There's really just these four, I would say maybe even only three of those carriers are really dominating the market. And out of them, Verizon is by far the most popular and dominant vendor in the market. If it was only Verizon and AT&T, we would call that a duopoly. So an oligopoly is generally, when we're talking like 3-4 companies that dominate the market. In a duopoly, you have two companies that are really dominating that market. This is going to be a real difficult market structure to try to make a gain in as a new company. And so, the reason why I said it's really just 2 or 3 of these companies that dominate is because companies like T-Mobile, they're out there, but they're having a hard time trying to compete numbers wise. This is generally non-price competition because they all kind of offer similar pricing. It's not going to be exactly the same. But again, what they're basing their sales on and what they're trying to draw customers based upon, in this case, is going to be quality and service, particularly geographic, regional service. Where can you get a phone call and where can you not get a phone call, or where do you have service, where don't you have service compared to your competitors? These companies are also really interdependent upon each other. And what we mean by that is that they all feed off of each other's ideas. So if Verizon comes up with a new technology, a new strategy, a new service, AT&T and Sprint and T-Mobile are all going to follow right straight behind. We kind of see this, and you see this all the time in the fast food industry, which is not necessarily an oligopoly. It's more of a monopolistic competition, but the idea of interdependence. As one company, and McDonald's is the big one here, as McDonald's comes out with new ideas, everybody else is going to follow. Burger King's going to follow. Wendy's is going to follow, and they're going to come up with similar products or similar concepts or services that McDonald's did, and vice versa. Burger King might come up with a new idea, and McDonald's is going to end up doing that too because they see the success in doing that. A good example of that would be the Happy Meal. McDonald's came up with a kids meal, a Happy Meal. Prior to the Happy Meal, there wasn't a kids meal at a fast food restaurant. And then, unfortunately, I can remember when Happy Meals came out. It was probably 30 some odd years ago. But prior to that, you just ordered a hamburger and a fries and maybe a soda or whatever as a kid. And then they developed the Happy Meal. And then other chain restaurants basically started coming up with meals that were specific to children. And that had like the little toy inside, right? So that's the real catch to keep kids hooked. When we talk about a monopoly, so everybody's probably familiar with the concept of monopoly, but when we talk technically about monopolies, we need to determine the difference between a coercive and a non-coercive monopoly. Coercive monopolies are illegal. They gain their dominance by pushing aside competition. And so there's a really high barrier to entry that's not necessarily a legal barrier, but it's a dominance by one company over the rest of the market. And that one company gets the benefits of abnormal profits. They can set prices wherever they want. Their service doesn't necessarily have to be good because it's the only place you can go to get things. So the other form would be a non-coercive form, and that's just simply, some monopolies exist out there legally because they don't have competition or the government has granted them a monopoly without competition. And so a couple examples I have here, the United States Postal Service has a monopoly on home letter delivery. Nobody else can do it. Nobody else does it. It's a quasi-governmental corporation, so that means it's part government, part private. But they have the benefit of being the only service of providing letters delivered to your door. There are parcel services like UPS and FedEx, but not letter services. The National Football League, the NFL, has a monopoly on professional football in the United States. Now, you would say the XFL now exists. It probably will not be around very long, I would guess. They're not getting the numbers that the NFL has, and they're also not competing during the same season, so it's not technically a competition. And then services like Spectrum or National Grid that provide utilities to your home, they're often provided monopoly by the federal government in order to reduce the number of lines that we have around and services that are needed. So Spectrum, if you want cable television in your home or something like that, you have to go through Spectrum. There are competitors. There's DirecTV and there's online services. But if you wanted hardwired cable service in your home, you have to go through Spectrum in Glens Falls. These are some of the legal forms of monopolies that exist out there. So a pure monopoly is when there's only one company because they're the only one that exists. They come up with a new technology and nobody else has access to that technology. A natural monopoly is exactly what we were just talking about with Spectrum, where to minimize costs and infrastructure, the government grants a monopoly. The third kind is a geographic monopoly. These exist primarily in small towns where you have the need for just one, like CVS. If you're going to build a CVS and put it in Argyle or Fort Anne or Corinth, you're going to do it, and there's really going to be no need for another competitor. So there's what's called a geographic monopoly. Technological monopolies, and we're going to talk about these in a little bit more detail later on, but it's essentially the idea that inventors are provided with monopoly capabilities because they spent time, research, development, coming up with a new product. The federal government, when providing them with whatever innovative protection they have, a copyright or something to that effect. Along with that generally comes a short-term monopoly where they are the only ones who can develop or provide that product. And then government monopolies. I talked about the U.S. Postal Service. That's basically when the government is going to be the only single provider for a service. If we were to ever move to a single provider healthcare service where the government provided it, that's what we're talking about, a monopoly on a product that's provided by the government. So we have some advantages and disadvantages to monopolies here. The advantages all revolve around the ability to encourage people to do things, to come up with new inventions. The disadvantages are really about the ways in which competition and quality are limited. And so we as consumers really suffer if monopolies exist and are not providing the types of advantages or the types of products or services that we would normally expect. Or pricing. Pricing could be completely skewed if you have monopoly because people are going to pay whatever they have to in order to get access to some of these products. The last form is called a monopsony, and this is a relatively new market structure highlighted by the way in which Walmart has grown to power. And so Walmart's a pretty unique company. It's a pretty unique corporation in the way in which it became powerful because it upended the whole system. It used to be that if I manufactured socks and I wanted to sell socks, I would go to Walmart and I would say, hey, I have these socks that I'd like to sell. I'll sell them to you at this price and you sell them for this price. And there's your profit. It's already built in. Something called the manufacturer suggested retail price. What Walmart did was they got big enough where they went to the manufacturers, the sock makers, and said, hey, if you want to sell in Walmart, you're going to sell it to us at this price. No longer did the manufacturer tell the retailer what the price would be. Walmart flipped the whole thing and turned it around so that they had the advantage when demanding pricing. And what that's done is it's driven down prices quite a bit. Retail prices have not kept up with overall pricing across the board, primarily because of companies like Walmart who've managed to force companies to go overseas. In order to be able to sell a product to Walmart at a price that they're demanding, you can't make it in the United States anymore. You have to go have it manufactured in China, for example. in order for you to be able to afford to sell it to Walmart at such a small price that they can then sell it at such a small price. So this is called a monopsony because it's not technically a monopoly. Walmart is not the only retailer, and they're not necessarily the only one that has this business model. But they were the first one to really be powerful enough that they could make these types of demands on manufacturers that it had an impact on how things were going to be sold to major corporations, and then how that's going to benefit or hurt in some cases when we talk about quality of goods, the Americans or the American consumer. All right, I'm going to end it right there for this one. I'll do a separate video for business organizations. Again, just follow right along on the sheet that I have attached to the Google Classroom assignment for this, and answer the questions to the best of your ability. Thanks.